We should be.
I mean, it cannot be a live event if there's not a dog barking. So I'm loving this already.
Here we are. We are online.
Very good. Excellent. So it is my pleasure, my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rodrigo Mendoza. Rodrigo was born in Mexico City and as a teenager moved to Cuautla, Morelos. In high school, his passion for science took him to participate in the local and state math Olympiad. His love for chemistry made him choose to study the licenciatura in chemistry at Universidad de las Américas, Puebla, where he initially had planned to become a physical chemist, as he thought he could combine both of his passions for chemistry and math. However, organic chemistry entered his life, and it was love at first sight. He completed his honors project under the supervision of Dr. Cecilia Anaya in a catalyst project. He then moved to Montreal to pursue his PhD at McGill University under the supervision of Dr. Jim Glisson and Dr. Nicolas Moitessier. His thesis was entitled Design, Synthesis, and Biological Evaluation of Novel Anti-Estrogens, where the focus was to develop new treatments for breast cancer. Upon graduation, he worked at Toronto Research Chemicals, where he was a synthetic chemist. However, his love for drug discovery took him to pursue a postdoctoral fellowship in Dr. Andre Uding's lab at the University of Toronto, where he collaborated with the Structural Genomics Consortium in developing new probes targeting the protein ZDB1, as well as developing new methodologies to synthesize cyclic tripeptide. Then he worked at Cyclic Therapeutics in Toronto, where he worked in the development of cyclic peptide-based therapeutics. When Zealand Pharma acquired Cycle, he was recruited by the Drug Discovery Unit at the Institute for Research in Immunology and Cancer at the University of Montreal, where he currently works as a research officer in projects related to the development of new treatments against acute myeloid leukemia. So I'm very excited to have you here, Dr. Mendoza.
Thank you very much.
And I deeply admire you as a scientist, and I'm very, very happy that our students get an opportunity to hear what you have to say. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Monse. It's, as many would have suspected, Monse and I know each other for a long time. So it's always an honor that Monse presented. So I guess from the introduction, my talk, and that's why I have the logo of University of Toronto on the top. And I'm going to be talking about my work that I did at, as a postdoc at University of Toronto in Andre Uding's lab. And unfortunately, I won't be able to share any of the work that I'm doing right now because everything right now is confidential. But hopefully, soon enough, I might be able to come back and share with you what we're doing here. So there we go. So I divided my presentation in two. In the scientific part, there is the identification of the first fragment hits for ZDB1 tutor domain, and also the synthesis of medium-sized ring cyclic peptides. And all the work that I've done have always been around the research in order for drugs regarding cancer treatments, and especially lung cancer. It's important because it is the deadliest cancer in Canada. And every year, close to 29,000 Canadians will be diagnosed with breast cancer, and 21,000 of them die from it. And what it is, new therapeutics need to be, made in order to address this problem, but also because there's a lot of stigma regarding lung cancer. So there's not as much stigma regarding breast cancer or many other cancers, but there is about lung cancer. So not only is there a lot of people dying from it, but also there's less initiatives in order to invest money in order to investigate new treatments for this type of cancer. So in this vein, the Structural Genomics Consortium, that is an organization in Toronto that does the identification of new potential targets that could be used in order to treat cancer, identify and co-crystallize the ZDB1, which it is a histone lysine N methyltransferase. So what it does, it modifies the methylation of lysines in the histones, so that either they put like 4 methyl groups, so it is going to be 3 methyl groups, sorry, and it's going to be positively charged, or it is not going to have any charge at all. And this interferes in how the histones can open in order to have the DNA open for transcription or not. And so what is interesting about ZDB1 is that it's amplified in non-small and small cell lung cancers. And what has been interesting is the depletion of this protein reduces cancer growth in vitro and in vivo, which means that it could potentially be a good target in order to develop new drugs for it. So the first structure of the tutor domain, and by the tutor domain, I mean the domain that actually reads this methylation of histones. So if it is positively charged, or if it's not charged at all, is whether it would bind and would initiate transcription. Because there's the other part that can actually do the transfer or the trapping of the methyl group, in order to control this positive charge on the histones to either promote its opening or to promote its closing. So what is important is that the tutor domain itself, that is the reading domain that reads this state of the lysine, it had never been reported, and we didn't have any structures of it. And this is the crystal structure that was published originally, that they use this peptide at the bottom left. And let me just... here we go. And so they use this peptide, and with this peptide, they were able to co-crystallize it. And they identified that what's interesting is that this peptide contained two different sites. One site that recognizes the lysines that are acetylated, but also a site that recognizes lysines that are methylated. And that this became really interesting because there's been a lot of research recently done in order to target bromo domains or tutor domains, which are reading domains of many different peptides, in order to target and engage with them for potential therapeutics. So now that we know that we have a methyl lysine pocket and acetyl lysine pocket, then we did a screening of a bunch of different compounds that we had available and identified these small fragments by X-ray crystal structures. And then we started to work from there. So this was the compound that we identified as a fragment with the SGC, obviously, them doing all the crystallization of the peptides, and also with this triazole at the bottom that bound to the acetyl lysine pocket. So what we started doing was just start looking at how the binding of the compound affects the dynamics of the peptide. So we did a small NMR study, and basically what we have here is that in red, we have the peptide on its own, that it is only treated with the MSO. So there's no compound. So it's basically the peptide that it is on its basal state without any ligand attached to it. And in blue is when you have some of the ligand attached, like 2.5 millimolar concentration of the ligand in the solution. And then when you superimpose both crystal structure, both NMRs, but to the NMRs, you realize that actually the peptide starts having different movements, and you can actually see that by, for example, how these two areas are not superimposed, but other areas are superimposed as well. So this indicated that basically through this qualitative analysis, that our compound was actually also binding, so that we can use this technique to analyze to see if compounds were binding or not. And the nice thing about this technique is that it's really fast in order to be able to do some screening. So, and this is how it looked close by in the proximity of the peptide. So the next step to do is like, okay, that is a good hit, but the problem is that whenever doing any biophysical assays, it was a very, 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 very low potency binder. So we try to improve the potency of the compound. And so the first thing to do is change the oxygen to a nitrogen, and instead of having this cyclic, maybe open the structure to see if that level of flexibility would allow for better binding. So the problem being that, for example, the KD of this compound was only 8.8 micromolar, which is really high. You usually want to have something in the millimolar, not in the micromolar. So that was really surprising that it was so high. But it's like, you know, it's a good start. Let's try to see if we can improve this. So in order for the synthesis to go, for those who are organic people, the first step was just to do an SN2 from this nitrogen into this carbon to provide this compound, which then was just protected by a bulk group so that the nitrogen would interfere in any other reactions, then treated with base to promote the cyclization into this lactam, then using Lawson reagents to make the thiolactam, then treated with the hydroside to make the triazole, which then deprotect the buck group, and then finally protect this with an acetyl group. And this is for the closed form, but for the open form, it was first protecting with buck group, and then this nitrogen being much more nucleophilic than this one selectively protected the buck group. Then the acetylation of the aniline, then also Lawson's reagent to make the thioamide, then making the triazole with the hydroside, deprotection of the buck group, and acetylation. And then we had the two compounds ready to be tested. And then as I mentioned before in the previous slide, the results were not great. So in medicinal chemistry, an important thing is, so we were able to have a crystal structure. We were able to identify areas of opportunities. So what can we change? So there's three potential places that we can change. We could change the triazole, because we need to see if the triazole is the best scaffold that we could actually have. We can change things around the acetyl group to check, oh, maybe other groups can be actually much better than just an acetyl group. And we can modify easily on the para position of this compared to, regarding this nitrogen, that we can actually modify things there. And this is usually how medicinal chemistry works in order to do SAR studies, which stands for structural activity relationship. So what can we modify in our compound in order to get better compounds? And that's what we did. So in the first, we started targeting and modifying the acetylysine. So, making ureas or making guanidines, another urea here, and making a sulfonamide. Well, all of these guys, in summary, they sucked. They were not active at all. However, this one was still slightly better. It's still in the millimolar, but not great. And this job, all this work was done in collaboration with Sean Liu and Diego Diaz, that are great members of the UNAM lab. And so, for example, in this one, as I showed you before, we did also this 2D NMR study. But this one, for example, we were able to see that that it would bind, but like the most of the signals would overlay, meaning that most likely was a very weak binder. And that's why we're seeing really high numbers. But we were able to obtain crystal structures. We were able to obtain a lot of crystal structures. So, for example, the KD of this was 136 millimolar, even higher than the other ones by a magnitude of 3. So it was definitely not good. It's okay, so let's move on. We definitely know that we cannot kind of, play much with that. So let's actually try to modify the X. I'm not going to go into a lot. So it's like we have to do a lot of work in order to optimize conditions, in order just to be able to put a bromo here. So when we were trying to do it directly from the triazole, we couldn't do it. So it had to be directly from this compound. And this is part of the job of an organic chemist. Organic chemistry is not an exact science, it's an experimental science. And sometimes, the textbooks would suggest that maybe we can get it here, but, chemistry says no, thank you. And in order to we could not have it from the triazole, we had to do it from the acetylated amide. And then we were able to get really good yields of the bromo and the chloro. Once we had that, we were able to do the very same sequence that I showed you before in order to get the triazole with the benzylamine acetylated, with the bromo and with the chloro. And then from the bromo, we were able to use that as a synthetic handle in order to put different things like a cyano or a methyl group or a cyclopropyl or just a double bond here. So, trying making like small modifications to see if they would be good. Long story short, we still stayed within the millimolar, which we were surprised. It's like, okay, we're not really improving much, but also our 2D NMRs look very similar. Like, this one, for example, looks pretty good in terms of like the blue and the red. There's not a lot of overlap, but our numbers sucked. The numbers were not very good. It's even though we're in the low millimolar, we wanted micromolar, and we never got the into even the micromolar region. Okay, so then what else can be done? It's like, okay, let's try to modify the core. We had the different heterocycles that would change either 5 or 6 member rings with nitrogens in different positions. Well, long story short, none of these guys were active. So it's like, okay, so we had to kind of go back a little bit into the drawing room. It's like, okay, but what we know is that this peptide did bind, and we know that we have the acetylysine here, and we know that we have good compounds that potentially bind to acetylysine. And one of the things is that peptides are not good drugs because they can get processed by the body really quickly. So we want to start introducing elements that look more like a drug. So whenever doing, so we were thinking of introducing that triazole that we have with the acetyl group here in order to see if we could actually get a more potent compound. And also it would be linking both the acetylysine pocket and the methylysine pocket, just like the original peptide did. So what we did was truncate the peptide. So it's basically all of this part is the same as here, with the difference that then instead of having the other part of the peptide, we have this compound here. So in order to do it, it was a very similar sequence. But instead of having just methyl group, I would have to have an amine here. We were able to get it, but the problem is whenever getting the deprotection step, it did not work. So I had to envision a different strategy where we're starting from this anhydride. I was able to open with a hydroxide directly to this amino acid that was protected, and then it was reduced, then do a Mitsunobu reaction in order to put that nitrogen, then a deprotection and the acetylation, and then finally protection of the bulk group to get to the diamine. And the tricky thing is whenever you have two amines, they're very similar. So we had to make sure that whenever introducing both amines, we would not have to deal with selectivity problems in reactions, because both amines, if I throw things that can react with amines, these two would react the same if one was not protected over the other. So that was the tricky part in order to make this compound. But then I had to make the synthesis of this peptide and then just do the proper modifications in order to access this proper compound, which this included just the deprotection of the CB side group in order to have release the amine, and then do the methylation of the amine to have the dimethyl lysine part, and then couple it with our amine here. And we were able to get crystal structures. It was our best compound, but still in the millimolar region. Beautiful crystal structures, though. It were perfectly overlaid. So here we have the original, the original peptide, and then here we have a compounds, and it overlaid. This is the original compound. That is like the one that only had the arms, only had methyl groups, and this is actually our compound that is a hybrid between the peptide and the ligand overlaid. So the original peptide is the green one. Our compound is the yellow one. It overlays. It does the same. It binds in the same way, but it's a terrible binder by biophysical data. And unfortunately, my time in the Udin lab was done, so we ended up publishing all of the work that we did as the first ligands and the first hits to occupy the Tudor domain of ZDB1. And we showed that at least this proved that this protein could technically be targeted, but definitely be more efforts. The fragments occupy the acetylysine pocket and with efficient interactions in terms of hydrogen bonding. And we will obtain 8 compounds that were co-crystallized with ZDB1, providing even more structural information. And but also what was interested is like the use of this atropisomeric amino acid in order to create new projects in the Udin lab. And so this was like that, a little bit of medicinal chemistry aspect done. Not the greatest story in terms of the active compound, but a little bit for you to see what is the type of work that is done whenever trying to do. And this is the very first part of the drug discovery process, because this is to validate a target. So before you even start doing anything crazy, you have to validate a target. And this was part of the validation of the target, which is, one can argue that it had not been completed, but it's, it was a matter of time and a matter of like the resources and people that can be done with it, because in pharma, well, they have all the resources and all the people to do this. In academia, it's more limited. But I'm going to jump into the other part, and I want to talk about the synthesis of medium-sized rings. And so whenever we think about rings, we think about rings that are small molecules. So for example, anything that is under 8. So from rings from 3 to 7 member rings, this is a 6-member ring here. And these guys are fairly easy to make. Then you have medium-sized rings, and then anything that is bigger is a macrocycle. And the thing is that whenever we try to make rings between 3 and 7, the enthalpic cost is fairly large because of the transition state and the energy of the transition state. But the entropic cost is very low. So a lot of these transformations are I completely favored, mostly because they're driven by entropy. When we're thinking about large member rings, the enthalpic cost is fairly low, but the entropic cost is really high because you have to organize everything in order to bring the head and the tail next to each other, which then the entropic costs become extremely high. But they form. They do form because they have a very small enthalpic cost. So it is kind of balancing either enthalpy and entropy. However, medium-sized rings have the worst of both worlds because the enthalpic cost is extremely high, because whenever you try to get these structures together, the ring starts interacting with each other, and then they doesn't want to get in close to each other. But also there's a huge entropic cost in the transition state compared to the other products. So basically, these guys don't want to form ever. So there is very few ways in which, whenever trying to bring from head to tail, it closes, and they do work. But in general, the strategy is to make them either through ring closures directly or through ring expansions, which either are fragmentation ring expansion or rearrangement ring expansion. So one of the few examples where you can actually do a head to tail closure to make this is through ring close metathesis, wherever you take two double bonds and then you kind of close a ring. There's a bunch of examples on how ring close metathesis is good. And one of the reasons why it works is because it uses a metal that the bonds between metals and carbons are much bigger, and it makes a really big ring that then it starts kind of crunches it down. So it's kind of bringing it head to tail, but it's a little bit like, in a way, we can say that it's a little bit of cheating because it doesn't form the 8-member ring directly, but it starts with almost a 12-member ring that then it closes down. And 12-member rings can form, but directly 8, they don't. But there's a lot of examples in which they can do by ring expansion. So for example, in this case, what you do is create this leaving group, and then this oxygen pushes in the electrons and opens everything up to give you this particular structure. Or for example, the other way is to ring expansions in which you deprotonate this position here and it inserts and then does the ring expansion as well. So we were inspired by a lot of the work, and in the Uden lab, we have done some work into integrate different pieces in order to expand the structures of our peptides. So whenever you have this acidity embedded in a peptide, this bond is very weak. So whenever you introduce into an amino acid, the nitrogen of the amino acid, the amine, will react here, opening up the structure, and then you can close down the structure again and then open it with a nucleophile. So it was a way to integrate and how to do an expansion from here to here. What we thought about is, okay, we want to apply an expansion that it is actually where we can actually use small rings and then make medium-sized rings that are really difficult to actually attach. So what we thought and envisioned was making this imide, and then through the imide, then promote the formation of the 6-member ring. So remember how I said that small rings, they do form. So you form the 6-member ring, and then that 6-member ring collapses and giving you the opening of the product to give us this, which the idea was good, and our work was published in 2017. So I started to form how to form these imides, and that was the most complicated part. I'm not gonna bury you. The only thing is that we tried a bunch of different things at the beginning and it didn't work. And again, part of chemistry. And then one of the problems that I was seeing is that we cannot really see the compounds by any of the techniques that we have. It's like, okay, so let's put a chromophore. Let's make sure that it's easy to see by the traditional techniques that we have. And whenever you attach nitro groups, they're very easy to see, but also not only are they easy to see, but also they sometimes help in order to get crystal structures. So we're able to make first a small library of these imides using this particular reagent that I synthesized before. You make the imide, and we make, from 4, 5, 6, 7-member rings, and with the presence of aromatic structures. And we collaborated with the lab of Tantillo at UC Davis, and they were able to calculate the energy of the basal energy levels of each of the compounds. And they did this using the MO06 to X6331 plus GDP theory level, which that is, what they do. They particularly do this in acetonitrile. The important thing is then they normalize the values. And whenever the transamide conformation of the open structure, that was the lowest energy level that they found. What if it is the cis amide? It was 6.2 kcal per mole. And just to give you an idea, 3.5 kcal per mole, it can be determinant of something happening or not. So 6.2 is really high. But also 6.4 kcal per mole was that formation of that intermediate. So it's the highest in energy. That intermediate is the highest in energy, but not as high this is higher than even the starting material. So whenever you have the starting material that is higher in energy than the product, then we know that this process is going to be driven thermodynamically, because it's going to want to form as the product is going to be more stable. So let's test that out. So what we did is deprotect this nitrogen. The nitrogen closes in, and then it ring expands. And that's exactly what happened in pretty good yields. And we were able to make a small library of compounds, of these compounds that are almost impossible to make if you want to close them from ring to tail. But these are very simple compounds. The real challenge, sorry, before I wanted to jump ahead really, but the thing is then we tried it. So if you realize this one, there is 1 and 2 carbons in between the nitrogen. So it's a beta amino acid. In this one is an alpha amino acid. And however, when the alpha amino acid, this one did not do the ring expansion. And actually the computational analysis showed us why. Again, same example, but they normalized the value of the transamide into 0. However, the transition state is more stable in terms of energetics. So it decided to stay in the transition state, but I left it open to where what was really fascinating is it got introduced another oxygen here just by spontaneous oxidation in the presence of oxygen in the air, which I mean, clearly it's a radical-based mechanism, but not sure why that oxidation was. And it was 87% yield of this isolated, and I was able to repeat it. Beautiful, beautiful, but unfortunately it did not provide us that ring expanded product. But whenever getting into simple molecules is different than getting into tricycles. Tripeptides, or cyclic tripeptides specifically. Because these cyclic tripeptides, whenever you start inputting amides, you have bonds that are really flat. So these guys don't like to form. And there's a lot of examples where they try to make the cyclic tripeptide, and then they see how it just decomposes right away into these diketopiperazines, which is the smallest of the cyclic peptides that exists. So we know that if you try to do from head to tail, those ones, they don't really work. But what if we do the ring expansion from our from 2,5-diketopiperazines? It's the smallest, and they're super easy to make, extremely easy to make. And then how to use this very easy to make structure to make really complicated structures. So that's what we did. We synthesized a bunch of different diketopiperazines in really good yields just by making the cyclic, the dipeptide, and then just cyclize it on its own. So easy peasy, no problem. I mean, some of them were a little bit trickier and they were not as cooperative as, for example, this one only at 29% yield, but in general, they were pretty easy to make. Then let's make other things that we can attach to make different kinds of expanded products. So, you know, with a double bond here or with a methoxy group here that maybe can be used to deprotect later on. And then we made a small library of all of these compounds that could potentially be used for ring expansion. So will the ring expansion work? It's like, well, we turn again to the Tantilla group, and based on them, it should. And the numbers are actually even better here, because the transamide, again, put at 0 kcal per mole, that is the product. The cis amide, 3.6 kcal per mole. Again, 3.5 usually tells you whether a process will happen or not. So 3.6, definitely, most likely, we will see only transamide. But the intermediate now is 12.5 kcal per mole. It's extremely high. And the starting material is 2.8. So again, we're expecting that this is going to be driven by thermodynamics. It's going to be a thermodynamic-driven process. So when looking at this, it's just the trace of the HPLC. Whenever doing this is the starting material, we do the deprotection, and within 4 hours, we only see product. So we go from here to here, and an extremely clean reaction, as you can see. So that was very exciting. So then we applied it. So we were able to get the combination of the different isomers of this potential structure in really good isolated yields. And we apply this technique to all of our compounds, whether they would not necessarily having only with a 5-member ring here, but also it can be open structures. It can have lysines from protected serines or really greasy ones with carboxylic acids. So it was really exciting to see how we were able to develop a methodology in order to access these compounds that they're really hard to access and that they have a space in order. And that's why the title of my talk is like introducing a chemical space, because it was not easy to make these compounds before. And now we provide a methodology in order to start making these compounds, and maybe they can start being tested in order to see if they can be of any use within the drug discovery world. Also, for those that like NMR, if you're taking NMR classes, I wanted to put the NMR of this because this shows how strained this structure is. Like those peaks are sharp, 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 sharp. And as well as we only see one particular isomer of the compound, we only see the transamide, which makes sense because the cisamide, and particularly this here, is the one that otherwise it would not be able to form. It's too high in energy. But what we're very happy is that we were able to obtain 2 crystal structures to definitely, as a real clear proof that we obtained these 2 different products. So that was kind of the icing in the cake for this. So in summary, I'm presenting you the development of this methodology to make these medium-sized rings that were very elusive and really difficult to make. And all through these tetrahedral intermediate cyclo intermediate that then this ring expands. And this work opens the door, as I mentioned, for the evaluation of medium-sized rings in drug discovery, which is an area of drug discovery that is growing a lot. And definitely I want to acknowledge not only the people at the SGC, which are extremely important, Pavel, Santha, Elena, and Mathieu, but also all the members in my group that collaborate in this, and I have fun memories of working with all these people. But before finishing, I want to let you know a little bit, because now I'm a research scientist at the Institute for Research in Immunology at Cancer at the University of Montreal. These are just a couple of pictures. On the left-hand side is, the lab. Then we have the little pictures of the facilities that we have here. And on top is Professor Anne Marinier, who is the main researcher here. And it is it's the biggest drug discovery unit in academic setting. Professor Marinier, she worked at Bristol Myers Squibb as a medicinal chemist. So a bunch of people from BMS, when BMS site closed here, they approached this research institute to bring that industrial kind of mentality of drug discovery into an academic institution, which is very unique. And then the drug discovery unit was born, but with the people that actually know how to do drug discovery in industry. And it's been now 15 years. I've been only here for 3 out of those 15 years that it's been open. And I wanted to share this because I want to talk to you a little bit about careers, because all of you will very soon be embarking into your very own experiences after you finish your degree. But I got this job because when, as Monse mentioned at the beginning, when the pharma acquired the company where I was working, they only acquired the intellectual property, not the people. So I was in search for a job. I called a friend of mine, and it happened that weekend after I called him, he went to a family party. And in that family party, there was this guy that became my colleague. And they were talking, and it's like, oh, my friend is looking for a job. Are there any openings where you are? His friend said, well, the family member said, yes, we do have an opening. He contacted me. I contacted this person, and I was able to apply. And I heard of this position because of the network of people that I have. So it is very soon you will be embarking into a part in which you're going to be students and you're going to be entering the workforce, or you're going to go into doing grad school. So I wanted to bring you 5 tips for your career development before I finish this talk that I found extremely important. First of all, become really good writers. And I remember when I started my degree that I would roll my eyes, and a lot of people would roll their eyes when saying, it's like, oh, but why do we take so many classes about writing? I'm not going to be a writer. If I wanted to be a writer, I would have studied literature. Well, let me just set this straight. Most of the time, I'm writing reports, or I'm writing emails, or I'm writing something. I'm always writing. And there's nothing sadder than seeing an email that is written with not the proper language. And because then writing becomes the first part of how you present yourself to the world. So become really good at writing. It's extremely important. Don't underestimate it. The second is be kind. Be kind to other people and just treat others the way you like to be treated. It is very simple because this becomes very important when you start working, because if you try to force people to do something for you, it doesn't work like that. So just remember that when someone is kind to you, you might be willing to help, and it works the other way around. Also, don't judge other people's choices. And it's very easy to judge other people. It's like, why are they going to doing that? Or why do they want to do that? And many times, just think about this, we judge other people's choices because we're trying to justify our own decisions. Most of the people, are actually a lot of the people that I studied with, both my undergrad and grad school, we're all doing many different things right now. And there's this expression in Spanish, right? El sol sale para todos. So there's space for everybody. And everybody takes decisions based on what their passion and what their feelings are and how they're feeling in the moment. So make sure to apply that. Network, and meet people in a professional setting. But also, not only networking is meeting people in conferences. Also, if you have any questions about a particular thing, or email people, like, go do your research, see which people are doing what, and send a professional cold email. It's like, I'm very interested about this. I have a friend that got a job at Wiley, a publishing company, and her network was all by email. Discover what your strengths are in terms of your personality, and use that. If you're more of an introvert, maybe it's going to be easier for you to actually do this by email. If you're an extrovert, you maybe will thrive in a meeting with a lot of people, but always network and always keep expanding the network of people that you know for a professional setting, because in this world, it applies the case, there's politics in every level. So, if, the world works by, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And last but not least, always be professional. Doesn't mean do not have fun, but always address people with professional and I guess this repeats a little bit with point number 2 by being kind, but also be extremely professional in how you address people, because this will be the way that people will see you. And in a professional setting, this is everything. And just remember that you will be building, and you're building right now, a reputation. And a reputation takes many, many, many years to build, but it takes 1 second to destroy it. So always work on that. And if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer anything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a great talk. I enjoyed so much, and I wrote down some questions. So I'm not going to enter inside more detailed things because I feel it's going to be a two-person conversation. But anyway, because it was really, really interesting. Also, the first part was really interesting up to me, even if you're saying that were not the greatest results up to me.
Yeah.
These results, because you added information, and that is the best things, because
absolutely, it's a great starting point.
Exactly. At the end, publishing these results means that you are giving the choice to another group to not waste time on that part, and maybe focusing on
I need to say, I think it was really a problem of the funding that we had in order for the project, because I think also with more time and more people, we would have been able to produce more molecules. But we were, sure. I mean, it's all a matter of resources, right? So, but yeah, it was. I mean, the results, particularly, I was really discouraged and / intrigued whenever we put the peptide together with a compound, because we said, okay, this has to be really good. Because we're going to be outcompeting, it's basically like adding the part that binds to the natural substrate. This has to be good. So one of the potential things is that maybe, there's many potential problems here, is that maybe the particular biophysical studies that we were doing were not the best, because they would also only use a truncated part of ZDB1, and this peptide is really massive. And so maybe we needed the whole peptide in order, because there might be some protein dynamics and protein conformations that we were underestimating. So yeah, there's a bunch of things that could have been explored, but definitely it was a great start by all means. And especially also The fact that we're able to obtain so many X-ray crystal structures.
Exactly, absolutely. I was going to ask you something like that, something about that, but I'm gonna leave the voice to the students. If you have any question, guys.
Yeah, please shoot.
Yes, Rogelio, please.
Yes. In the beginning, in the first peptide, you mentioned that the acidulate has a tracking mechanism, and I was wondering if it works in the same way as the CRISPR that was developed from bacteria.
So this one, right?
Yes.
So what was the question again?
Does the tracking mechanism from the acidulate, does it work or can it work the same way that the CRISPR that was developed from bacteria to
yes,
find?
but yeah, because the only thing that this does is that what it does is reading the. So basically, you have the DNA that is completely wrapped, and in order to be able to make the DNA accessible, in any kind of study that you do about, when you are trying to modify DNA or anything, you first have to make it available. And in order to make it available, you have to kind of open the histones. So, but in order to open the histones, what is fascinating about all this process is that whenever you have very specific transcriptors, the transcriptor has to know which part of the DNA has to read. So that is part of what the reading domain does. It ensures that it goes to the right part and to the right histone. And then it's like, okay, this is say, for example, it's like many servers. It's like, oh, okay, this is the right server. I'm going to open up here, and then we can modify this part of the DNA. So in general, yeah, it works in the same way. There's many different ways in which histones they work in terms of the opening and closing and modifying and kind of keeping control. You can have them acetylated, you can have them methylated, but yeah, it is all of the same process.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any other question, guys? Girls, also.
Yeah, I have one. So
Go, Julio.
So regarding the chemical calculations that you have for the rings and all that kind of stuff, do you know which software are you using?
Yes.
That is a very good question, and I know that I knew this, but I don't remember anymore.
Yeah, it is. We're using some calculations here on campus.
But I think that if I don't remember, I think that we're using Gaussian.
Oh, okay. Well, it's one of the most common ones for the molecules.
Was that? Say that again.
It's one of the most common softwares, right? For this kind of chemical calculations.
Gaussian is, yeah, especially to make base level calculations. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, with the pandemic, we have one of our faculty that got involved inside all this study of energy levels, and so the students are starting working on that.
Yeah, no, it is very interesting. I think it is fascinating to see how so small modifications can have such a big impact in the energy of the system.
Yes, absolutely. Any other question? So while they're thinking, I have one question. Could you please help us explaining a little bit, because I know that they have the question and they're not asking it. Explaining to them, how do you crystallize the heat compound in the binding pockets, or how is the process?
Oh, actually, that is a great question, because the whole point of the Structural Genomics Consortium is that they have a high throughput screening machine for crystallization. So, but in general, what they do, this is fascinating. So what they do is that first they express the protein. And so then basically what they do is they transfect E. coli. I think they were using E. coli in order to produce the peptide. And then they would purify the peptide. And then they would put like solutions of whatever concentration of the peptide in, I think it was in 186 well plate, but they're transparent well plates. And then they add all the different concentrations of different compounds, and then they they let them sit. But the thing is that these crystals are so tiny that they actually verify their crystals not by watching them but by microscope. So the whole kind of platform, they have like this like microscope that kind of moves, and that you can actually see, and it detects where crystals are being formed, and it tells you in this plate, in these positions, crystals are being formed, which is absolutely mind-blowing. And then what they do is that with these tiny tweezers that I would never be able to use, because I guess I would never have been able to be any of that, they grab that and then they put them on a little film, and then they give it to the X-ray crystallographer. And what is fascinating is that it just throws X-ray in all possible directions, but by the presence or the lack of presence on how it diffracts, they can actually, the software interprets how and what kind of elements are present there. So then you process the thing, and that's how you end up getting the crystal structures. But a lot of these crystals, you cannot see them with the naked eye. You have to actually see them in a microscope, which as a chemist, whenever we crystallize stuff, we always just use our naked eye to actually see whether we obtain a crystal or not. But in the Structural Genomics Consortium, when I saw, I was mind blown by the whole operation. It was fascinating.
Yeah, it is really fascinating, and it's amazing when you pass by and you go there and ask, hey, do you have any result or something? You enter in this really dark room, all the people with these 3D glasses checking out things.
Oh yeah, it is.
It is super nice.
The other nice thing is that the whole point of the Structural Genomics Consortium is to identify targets for based on crystallography. So what they're doing, it is an open access. So for example, everything that they do, and that is a part of the philosophy of the SGC, is everything that they do is public. Everything that they do gets published, and everything that they do gets reported. So all their crystal structures are in the public domain. So it is absolutely fascinating, and absolutely it is great to see how, because I remember giving them compounds, and then a week later it's like, oh, here's your crystal structure, and I was like, what? It is. It's crazy. It's so good.
And one important thing, because they always scare about chemistry and the chemist, they are not chemists, the people that do that. Normally are biotechnologists that do that.
Yeah.
They are also chemists, but most of the work is done by biotechnologists. So there's a huge part of the medicinal chemistry that is actually not done by chemists. Knowledge from somebody else.
No, and even, for example, I can tell you right now, for example, I make the compounds. I mean, as a medicinal chemist, we make compounds, but I don't know how to deal with cells or how to purify peptides. I don't do any of the enzymatic assays or any of the red ligand for that. And the thing is, part of the drug discovery process is, as I always mention, and I think it's very important to tell that, I'm pretty sure that if making a drug were a movie, the credits at the end would be longer than ones in the movie. The amount of people that are behind putting a drug in the market is absolutely insane. Because you have from the people that are actually validate a target, to then doing the drug discovery, to then getting all the preclinical studies done, then getting the clinical studies done, and then passing all those controls. And so it goes from the really basic research to clinicians. So it is the work that is done it's absolutely fascinating, and it is not a single man operation. It's not the operation of a one smart person. It is the operation of many men and women that work in their own fields to do their job, but trying to push for a common objective. So it is, in terms of scientific pursuits, I think is one of the most incredible scientific pursuits that the whole process involves a ridiculous amount of people. It's just insane how many people it takes to build up libraries of compounds to be tested, but also to have the proper tools and also how to have the proper training in biology to develop new tools. Because sometimes maybe the result that you want to read by the tools that exist, you cannot read it. You cannot read the binding affinity, or you cannot read any of that. And that's where biology pushes its limits in order to create new ways. So there is no, it is definitely the epitome of team effort, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Guys, any question? While I think. Okay, I have another one, but this
Go
is
for it.
the last part. It is super interesting. These are medium-sized synthesis, sorry, medium-sized ring synthesis. Have you checked, because there are many natural products that contain those kind of rings.
Yeah.
Have you checked if there are some natural products that maybe is following a huge long synthesis that you can use to apply this kind of chemistry?
Yes, so there is, which we wanted, again, it was lack of time, and then we published the paper, but there is definitely, so it is really interesting because there is this cyclic tripeptide that that it's been under a lot of fire in terms of whether it's, so the thing is, so many times when you try to make the tripeptide, instead of closing to do the tripeptide, first you get two of the, you got a tripeptide with another tripeptide, it makes the hexapeptide, and then that one closes. But the thing is, because it's going to be symmetrical,
sure,
what ends up happening is that the NMRs can look like you have a tripeptide, but you really have the dimer. So there's been a lot of the studies, but also a lot of the times whenever you have these guys, whenever they go to the mass spec, they contract, and then what you see is not the mass of the dimer, but the mass of what would look like as a tripeptide. So we definitely wanted to test. There's one example where we wanted to make definitely the dimer and then try to use our chemistry to do the ring expansion. And through that ring expansion that we could actually prove whether it was whether that natural product that is being kind of contentious in the cyclic tripeptide literature was the right report or not. But yeah, again, lack of time.
Yeah, no, that is always the problem. Or lack of people that can work on that also, because you know.
I mean, at least what is really cool is that now we have the tool. The only thing and why we don't think that it is the right compound is because that tripeptide was from glycine. So it was actually, from a. So when we actually asked the computational chemist to, because we wanted to do it, so we asked the Tantilla group, can you do the calculations? So based on the calculations, the intermediate, the cycle intermediate, was more stable than the ring expanded product, which, I mean, all the calculations had been spot on. And it is a relatively small system, so it's not like trying to do a calculation in a whole peptide. There's a lot of more dynamics involved. These are very rigid systems, so the numbers mean a lot. And so that is the only thing that we were always, is like the calculations say that it should not open, it should not exist. So it would be nice to be able to kind of put like an end to the story. We purposely made the dimer, and then we close it, here it is, and then we try to make the ring expansion, and here it is, it doesn't work. But yeah, I wish I had the time, but yeah, then but it definitely, hopefully, maybe, I mean, now the synthesis is, the methodology is out there, so it can be done. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Again, I'm asking any questions, something, otherwise, well, I have many others questions, but I think that's, it is too much. I don't want to disturb too much.
Yeah, I hopefully I didn't bury them too much in chemistry.
No, I don't think so. And finally, they're seeing some application or some reactions that we see in class, and that, you know, really used in a synthetic methodology. So if there are no other questions, I really thank you a lot for being here with us. It was nice, Grecia, fantastic. And hope to get in contact and remain in contact with you, because it's really fascinating what you're doing. Just to finish up, do you think that at certain points there is going to be possibility, some of these guys are starting looking for internship and things like that? Is it there at your institute possibilities of internship?
Yes,
or...
so there's definitely the academic department, and I will share directly with you the academics affairs department. There are definitely opportunities for international students, because the university, well, the institute is always trying to recruit people. it's much easier in the biological side of the institute, which is the biggest part of it. I don't know if the because do you have you have a chemistry bachelor's?
We have a chemistry major, but our major, the biggest major is biotechnology. So
oh, so definitely that would be the jam for a lot of people. We have a lot of different supervisors and a lot of PIs that do a lot of work in the biotechnology area. So I invite you guys to it's at the end where, so you can just, so yeah, so just go to IRIC or IRIC, and you can, you know, just, so you can see the type of research that is being done and who you, and then I will share definitely with you the opportunities that exist for, because yeah, if the biggest one is biotechnology, there's definitely a lot of stuff because we are a small, well, we're not that small, but we are the only chemist because we are the unit for drug discovery, so we're the only chemistry unit. But
yeah.
Besides that, it is only biology or biotechnology that is being done here.
Fantastic. So that is also another opportunity because several of them are gonna finish the semester, for example, and they are looking for opportunity to learn before going to grad school. So that
which is always yeah, which is fantastic because I think one of the reasons that I think it's a great idea to do it is, first of all, it's very different when you do a lab in school. But I remember with a bunch of people when they would do an internship and then you actually have to do the lab work, that it's either eye-opening for the good, well, it can be eye-opening in terms of like, you know what, I really like doing this, but also it can be eye-opening in terms of like, I don't really enjoy the lab work. And I think it's very important to be able to have that experience to make a proper and informed decision to see whether you really want to do grad school for 5 years doing that over and over. And I think it's extremely important to get that experience before, so that, you know, the more the informed decision you do, it's better in order to actually pick up the right supervisor, the right project, the right everything. So it is, I definitely encourage you guys to do as much of research as you can if you're interested in going to grad school, so that you can see if what you're doing is, or what you're going to be doing is really what you feel passionate about.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Mendoza. And
my pleasure.
So guys, to continue in 1 hour time, we have another talk. So this time is going to be presential.
Nice.
Okay. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Great meeting you. And good luck, everybody, with your courses. And keep enjoying as much as you can university. I know it's been tough because of the pandemic and everything, but make the best of it. And good luck with everything. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.